Woodhaven family, and welcome back to the Journey 24/7 podcast. Today we are going to be finishing up Matthew chapter 26. And if you remember, we finished up yesterday seeing that Jesus foretold that Peter was going to deny him 3 times. Well, today we open up with Jesus in Gethsemane. Oftentimes we call this the Garden of Gethsemane. It was more like a olive orchard, though, instead of what we think of as a garden. And Gethsemane actually means oil press. So this was like the process. Gethsemane would be the process of pressing down the olives to actually get the oil out to produce the olive oil. So the fact that where Jesus is praying here is Gethsemane is potentially symbolic. The reason I say potentially is because it's not directly stated in Scripture, so we don't want to just say this is for sure what is happening, but it also seems like a pretty big coincidence for it to be just a coincidence with how intentional the Lord is. And the reason I say this could be symbolic is when we think about that word Gethsemane, meaning oil press, pressing out the oil from the olives. Well, this is the same way that Jesus is about to have the weight of all of the sin in the world on him. In the same way this oil gets crushed out of the olives, Jesus' blood is going to be poured out for us. So Jesus is in Gethsemane, and he takes his inner circle of disciples, that's Peter, James, and John, with him as he goes to pray. And he says to them that his soul is very sorrowful, even to death, and he tells them to remain there and watch with him. So he went a little bit further from him, and it says he fell on his face and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." So in this, Jesus is saying, Father, if there's any other way, take this cup from me. And that cup that he's talking about is what he's about to experience. Being arrested, mocked, beaten, and ultimately hung on the cross to die. He's saying if there's any other way for this redemption plan to work, please take this from me. What we're seeing here from Jesus is such a perfect model of prayer. Jesus came to the Father with his desire, with what he wanted, but he didn't stop there. He said, "Not as I will, but as you will." So he's saying, Father, this is what I want, but if your will is elsewhere, that's what I truly desire. That's what I want, is your will to be done. This is also just a reminder to us of how Jesus is truly human. He knew what he was about to face. He knew the pain and the suffering, and we will get to that a little bit more in chapter 27 as we talk about the crucifixion. But Jesus knew all that he was going to face. He knew the pain, he knew the heartache, he knew the suffering. He knew all of it. And he's praying to the Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me. But nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. So he prays this prayer. He comes back to the disciples, and he found them sleeping. After all he did was ask them to watch. It says he said to Peter, "So could you not watch with me 1 hour?" Then he tells him again to watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So for the second time, Jesus went away and again prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again, he's praying for the Father's will to be done. And again, he came back and he found them sleeping. So he leaves them again and goes away and prays for the third time, saying those same words again. Then he came back to the disciples and said, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hand of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So there are 3 times that he comes back and the disciples were sleeping. Again, this could already be pointing us towards this denial by Peter 3 times. We see that number of times just come up again. But then he also says, "Let us go, my betrayer is at hand." You see, none of this was catching Jesus by surprise. He knew what was going to happen. And so they go down, and it says that Judas came up with a great crowd. And he had told this great crowd that the man that he kissed would be the one that they should seize him. And so he comes up to Jesus and says, "Greetings, Rabbi." Remember again that word rabbi, where he's viewing him just as a teacher and never as his Lord. Remember we talked about that yesterday. So as Judas comes up, Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Now that word friend there is probably seems like an odd choice of words because obviously Judas is not Jesus' friend. Judas has betrayed him. Judas has handed him over. And again, we talked about it yesterday for ultimately just about $7,500 in today's terms. So that word friend seems odd to us. Well, in the original Greek, the word he used was heteros. And this was not the typical word that they would use for a friend when you're talking about a close relationship. This was talking about someone that you really just had an association with. That was more so like we would think of just somebody you may know of. And according to the ESV Study Bible Notes, it's actually the same word that was used in parables where Jesus talked about someone that took advantage of a privileged relationship. We see these in chapters 20 and 22 where he used this. So that makes that word make a lot more sense. That it's calling back to him saying that he's taken advantage of this relationship he had with Jesus. All for just a measly small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. And again, it wouldn't make it right if it had been for an endless amount of money. But it shows just how little value he truly had for Jesus and his life. So as they are arresting Jesus, Peter, in his typical Peter self that's pretty impulsive, pulls out his sword and strikes off the ear of one of these servants that is arresting Jesus. Jesus says to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword." He says, "Do you think I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be so?" So Jesus says, look, this must happen. For the scriptures to be fulfilled, this must happen. Now, as we move on, we're going to move through this next part a little more quickly, just for time's sake. Jesus is brought forth in front of the council, and it says that the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. So they were finding people, or trying to find people, that is, that would come and give false testimony so that they could put him to death more easily. So they're looking for charges they can make to put him to death. And they said, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus said to him, "You have said so." This is verse 64. "But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power," Son of Man referring to himself, "and coming on the clouds of heaven." It says, "And the high priest tore his robes and said, 'He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?' They answered, 'He deserves death.' Then they spit in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, 'Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?'" So they say that he deserves death. They spit in his face, strike him, slap him, mock him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ." These are the things that Jesus knew he was going to endure, and we're going to see tomorrow. Obviously, it gets far worse than this. But even just this, he endured for us. He endured to be our substitute, for the innocent to pay the price for us, the guilty. We are so undeserving, yet he did it anyways. Speaking of being undeserving, just here below this, we see Peter denying Jesus. It says, "Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, 'You also were with Jesus the Galilean.' But he denied it before them all, saying, 'I do not know what you mean.' Then another girl sees him and says the same thing, that she saw him with Jesus of Nazareth. And he again denied it. 'I do not know the man.' Then another person came up and said, 'Certainly you two are one of them, for your accent betrays you.' It says, then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, 'I do not know the man.' And immediately the rooster crowed. And immediately it hits Peter. It says he remembered the saying of Jesus, 'Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and wept bitterly." So at the same time that Jesus is going to the cross for our sin and for Peter's sin, Peter is denying him. Peter recognizes this, and it says that he went out and wept bitterly. He recognized his shortcoming. He recognized his failure. You see, I relate with Peter in so many ways. We see so often in his life, especially when walking with Jesus, where he was well-intentioned, had the right ideas, was pumped up and excited, but then he would mess up, or he would doubt, or he'd have a moment of weakness. And that's what we're seeing here. But now we also know how Peter's life continued. We know that later on, Peter goes and he is persecuted for his faith and for going and serving the church and reaching people with the gospel, and ultimately is killed for his faith. So we see a man that here was scared and denied Jesus 3 times to then ultimately die because of his faith in Jesus. That's sanctification right there. That is growing in our faith right there. We see it in Peter's life. But right here, Peter made a mistake. Peter failed. He had weakness. But Jesus went to the cross for him anyways. So each and every one of us, we've all failed. We've all had moments of weakness. We all struggle. But remember that Jesus went to the cross for us anyways, because he loves each and every one of us. And now we are to go and we are to bring him glory in all that we do. We'll see you back here tomorrow as we jump into Matthew chapter 27.